Welcome to our very first lecture series for this session, 2020-2021. And also this is also our first time conducting webinar via online. Okay, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your participation for our webinar today. And I hope that you will have a good sharing knowledge session and hoping you can participate actively in this session. Okay, student? So, of course, I'm very glad to see familiar names. In fact, I found one of our participant is from a lecturer from Department of Chemical Engineering. Thank you, Dr. Tanti, for your support. And also, we have a few names from our lecturers. Dr. Azia is here, Dr. Iskandar, Dr. Wardah. Thank you so much for your support. Okay. Terima kasih banyak-banyak. And of course, to our honorable guest speaker today, Mr. Daniel Iman Delan. Thank you for your time and your willingness to share your knowledge and experience with our students. Thank you very much. Okay, before we proceed, I think I just need to mention to you that we're going to conduct today, for our session today just santai-santai. So you probably kita tak ada nak bagi, make very formal and so on. It's very chill je, okay. So, well, as you know, we are going to listen to our guest speaker on his title of presentation, Mattering Green in Development, how we should work to achieve a cohesive result, okay. So, we will be listening to our guest on his topic for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, plus minus, for his talk. And we will open the floor for Q&A session for about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on time that we have. Okay. So if you have any question, you can ask during the Q&A session. And you also can write your question in the chat box. So student, I'm expecting that you at least 5 questions from you guys. So 1 for each batch, boleh . So okay. Kalau semua okay, I think you need to to register your attendance, your participation. Okay. So maybe I start with to introduce with our guest speaker today. Semua okay semua? Okay. Mr. Daniel Iman Delan, he is here. Kalau you all boleh nampak dekat screen ni, he's here. Mr. Hi. Daniel Iman Delan, hi. A Malacca-born landscape architect, orang Melaka ni, a Malacca-born landscape architect, and executive director at Williams, Asselin, Ackaoui and Associate, WWA, a multinational landscape architect, planning and urban design company based in Montreal, Canada, Shanghai, China, and also Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He is the head of operation for the firm in Malaysia, where he is also responsible for the company expansion programs within the Southeast regions, especially Indonesia, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Okay. So maybe if I can share a few of his projects. So this is all his project that you can see from the slide. So he has been involved in international project for almost 20 years, such in China, Canada, Thailand, Australia, UAE, and local project in Malaysia, of course. Yeah. So which you can see in the slide here. So just to share a few of his projects. Okay, and he and his team also received many awards and world recognition for their projects, for their works. And the recent completed project is one of the most luxurious hotel and 5-star resort in the world, which is one and only in the Saru, Johor Bahru. I think you can see on the last slide of this presentation. Okay, so one and only. I think Mr. Daniel also will share about this project with us later. Okay, so this is just a few of his project. Banyak lagi kerja-kerja dia. Okay. Okay, so this is one and only in the Saru. So if I'm not mistaken, for one night is 7,000 ringgit per night, right?
Approximately there, yes.
Approximately, yeah. Okay, so memang tak mampu lah, okay. Okay, so one interesting fact that I would like to share with the student and hope this can inspire you on how he started doing globally. Yeah, he spread his wing to go international back in his university years in 2003, where he decided to go abroad for internship attachment in Shanghai as a practical student, and later back to Shanghai to establish his career after completed his Bachelor of Architecture of Landscape Architecture in UTM Skudai. Okay. So he also has been working together with famous architects such as Norman Foster, Moshe Safdie, Tadeu Ando, and many more. So as a landscape architect and being in the industry for almost 20 years and still counting, he strongly agreed that an architect and landscape architect or any relevant stakeholder should collaborate together and work hand in hand to have a successful and cohesive result. And that is about the topic of his presentation today. So I think without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Daniel Iman Delan for his presentation. Iman.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Khairul. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. I think that was a very flattering introduction that you've given. I don't think I deserve half of that, but it's nice nonetheless to be flattered every now and then. Thank you very much for inviting me for this sharing session. I'm very thrilled. I've been looking forward to it ever since I was told that I am participating in it. And then over the course of, I think, the last couple of weeks, we've been discussing on what sort of sharing of knowledge and information that we could be doing for this session today. And Dr. Khairul and I both, we went back a long time ago as friends in the university. And over the years, we've had a few exchanges of our thoughts as to, what kind of things that are happening in the built environment industry as a whole. And Dr. Khairul himself, who's an architect, and his base profession and then qualification expanded into studying, on things related to landscape, and then also to do with urban planning and environmental quality. And I think, that gave him a bit of insight about the importance of a cohesive kind of development, and then a process where everything has to correlate with each other. So I think it's important, therefore, that we, moving forward from this point on in our profession, and no matter which part and aspect of it we are in, must understand that the cohesive part of that is very, very important. So I call this talk session Mattering Green, because I think over the course of the last 1.5 decades, in my experience, I've seen an increase of interest towards how people want to apply greeneries into the works that they do in the built environment, be it in urban planning, in architecture, infrastructure, and even in interior. And there are a lot of terms that are being coined along the line of doing whatever that we're doing in terms of collaborating between nature and our structures. Things like biophilic architecture, things like living wall, vivarium have been put up over the years, but essentially, and as I discussed with Dr. Khairul some time ago, it's essentially the same thing. But what's more important, I think, than trying to interpret this is, the understanding that, it requires a lot of effort into making, whatever that we are trying to do work, especially in the line of having a collaboration between something that's living and something that's built and artificial. So here today, what I want to do is I want to chat with you about how we can work together, because I think essentially at the bottom line of everything that we do, it's all about the working together. As Dr. Khairul mentioned to you just now in his introduction, I've worked with some big names in the industry, but I hope you don't see that as a bragging rights, because I don't see it that way. But instead, as to why, those names are repeated sometimes whenever I work with people over my years of experience is that I think why those architects are successful in what they do, those planners are successful in what they do, and how, you know, we could deliver the results that we want is because there is a cohesiveness in the way we work. And it's not because they are famous, people listen to them, it's because that there is a sense of cohesiveness and then a sense of respect, which I will talk with you guys in a little bit as we move on in this talk session. So as I mentioned just now, there are a great deal of improvement and increase in terms of interest as to how people bring in greeneries into the living environment. So we look at the macro context of things, we see how you know, greeneries are being brought into, you know, the wider scale of our living environment, and that is into our cities. And of course, New York City, as you can see here in the corner of the screen, has always had its Central Park, which is one of the, you know, urban oasis that the world has come to know, and successful at that. But Central Park was built decades ago, but still is kept relevant in, you know, an ever-changing, what do you call this, metropolitan context. And you also see newer cities in the world beginning to adopt, you know, a more green policy, you know, bringing in more greeneries and nature into the context of the city. You know, some did it in a sizable sort of way, while others did so in a more micro sort of application. But, you know, knowing that the effort has existed is something that is really positive and good. But, you know, people have asked me, is it easy to do it? I would say it depends on a lot of factors. You know, to make a change, you require an ecosystem, you know, an ecosystem of collaborators. It's not just going to be one person wanting to do the change or one person wanting to lead it. It has to be everybody joining in together. So I call it an ecosystem of change. So for example, if we want to bring greeneries onto our streets, you have to deal with the engineers who may not want to give way to how they have been doing things, you know, for many, many years. You know, then you also have to deal with local authorities who has policies that you can't break. You have, you know, bodies that governs certain services of the city. So there are a lot of things that are happening along the way, which, you know, you have to understand before, you know, certain things can be applied. And so here it is, as a single voice, you can't do much. It's very difficult, but, you know, you require a cohesive effort in order for you to achieve that. So you see some of these images that I've showed you are places that, you know, if you go there, you can feel, you know, the wonderful things that the greeneries can do to, you know, the city as a whole. And also we see green happening a lot in architecture. You know, for example, the Park Royal in Pickering Street in Singapore. It's an impressive architecture, more for the reason that it has working ecosystem being applied to the building. You know, the water that's been collected up on the roof, and sometimes even the water from the sinks are all being channeled, you know, for the irrigation of all of these trees that you see. And it's not just something that they did for show, it's something that they did truly because they know that it could work. And then you see some of the other buildings, for example, the one here in Sydney, Australia, it's called the One Central Park. That's been designed to integrate onto its facade wonderful living greeneries. Again, you know, this is something that we often see a lot being proposed by designers, architects, but they don't often get carried through to the end. It's not because it's impossible to do, but it's because along the way, there are things that happen, you know, that either cut the idea or the vision smaller, or the team just couldn't simply work together, in which I will elaborate a little bit more on that. We also see green infrastructure. I've mentioned this briefly just now, how greeneries are being brought into the city and also to the infrastructural level. Now, I want to show you, just draw your attention a little bit to this particular picture here. It looks like any other picture, any other streets that, you know, probably you've seen before. You've got trees lining the streets. You've got, you know, nice greeneries, you know, protecting the walkways and the people from the dangers of the motorized vehicles. But as a practicing landscape architect here in Malaysia, I'm awe-inspired by this achievement. You'd be surprised why I call this an achievement, because it's so difficult to have such greeneries on the streets for the reason that, you know, the way we have infrastructures, we have services running underneath our roads, under walkways. You know, sometimes you argue with TNB, Tenaga Nasional, who comes over and says, no, we want this specific area for us to put the conduits. And so, you know, you can't have your trees over here. And then you got, you know, all the other sewerage and pipelines that happening. And sometimes it came to the point, it's rather frustrating, because you have to fight your way into getting something, you know, just as nice as this. But there are more and more people who have begun to realize that, you know, if they assist and they offer their helps in whichever corner of you know, the scope that they could, you know, they can make big changes like this. And I can tell you, whoever did this actually had the support of, you know, a good ecosystem of collaborators that helped them to really manage and plan all of this to fruition. And, you know, when most of you go out into the practicing world, you will understand what I mean. But it is at this point, I want to tell you that understanding and then respecting and collaborating with other professions in what we do is important in getting even the simplest thing done, as planting a tree on the side of the road. And then we see green in architecture. Of course, you know, the jewel building in the in Changi Airport. You know, it's mesmerizing. I look at it, I'm impressed, because I know the sort of work that's required to bring in all those greeneries into this building. Because then how do you contain an outdoor environment and an indoor environment? Who will lead all of this? Is it the architect? Is it the engineer? Is it the landscape architect? Well, the answer is all the above, because, you know, you have to have everybody playing their role and understanding that. And then a real collaborators will step on each other's foot many times, but, you know, it is when to step on each other's foot and then how to respond is what we need to know, and it's what is important to know. So you see, most of these things are happening. For those of you who are entering the practice very time soon, or maybe in the next couple of years, you will hear a lot of demands over this kind of response to designs. You will hear how people would want more greeneries. You would see how people want to bring greeneries indoor and then turn, you know, existing cities, for example, into something that's more green. You have to begin to know that process from now. You have to understand, you know, that you know, it requires, as I mentioned, an ecosystem of collaborators. And it is from this point on, you have to understand what you can, what you cannot do, and up to which point you have to trust, you know, the flag or the baton being passed to another, you know, co-practitioner in order to achieve the rightful vision that all of us want for the development. So here are some of the terms that we come often across, you know, bioswale, vivarium, green buffer, green shelter, canopy avenue, green wall. They all speak of the same thing, which is wanting greeneries in the context of whatever that we are doing. But, you know, as I mentioned just now, it could either be done successfully or not, because again, it's all about the collaboration. It's all about the cohesiveness of achieving the vision. And how do we do all of that? Now, I'm going to show you two diagrams. Now, it's diagram A and diagram B. So diagram A is what we commonly go through. And I'm going to say this to you in all honesty, and I'm very certain not many people will agree with me. I have done this before, and I can tell you a lot of people don't echo the same agreement with me on this, and I'm up for open fire, but I want to, you know, be frank to share it with you. Now, as I mentioned, I worked abroad before, and I worked with some successful people in their fields. And what I notice about them, as I mentioned, is their ability to cohesively work with other people. For example, people have always described the late Zaha Hadid as a monster. I read in you know, magazines, and I've seen in documentaries how people were so afraid of her because she has this, you know, weird persona, and she has this very fierce looking outlook. But when I sat on the meeting tables with her, you know, she didn't seem all of that, and she was very respectful of others. despite her, existence as a world famous designer, she gave everybody a chance to speak their mind. Of course, there's always debate happening, but at the end of the day, it's all about achieving the vision, not your ego. We worked with Moshe Safdie in the project that Dr. Cairo showed just now in Chongqing Raffles City. Moshe Safdie is the designer of Marina Bay Sands. He's a Canadian Hebrew, and we work with him for several projects in China and upcoming in Singapore. As I mentioned, he, like every other, big names designer that we've worked with, they're very humble to an extent that you're not afraid to offer your thoughts onto the table. But then when I return home to Malaysia, so this is when things get a little bit problematic, and I have to be, I have to be careful with what I'm about to tell you. There is a very big word. It's a very big word. Everybody wants to use it, but they use it in the wrong way. That word is called scope. S-C-O-P-E. It's a word I hate so much. I don't like it because what it does is that, yes, it's contractually required that you have to have a scope, which defines a professional network where you belong, but it also acts as a boundary. It limits you from, having a good discourse and exchange of ideas with your, fellow co-consultants. And I was told by a rather famous planner, I was told off by a rather famous planner here in Malaysia. It was my first month of practicing here in Malaysia in 2012. And the planner told me, what are you doing? Why are you putting trees where, we've already put all the services and everything? And I said, yeah, because for obvious reasons, you need shade. This is where you put the walkways and people are going to walk. And how can we do that if we don't have enough shade? And the answer that he gave me was, you wait for your turn. He said to me that he's going to take the plan first. And then the plan is going to be circulated to the engineers who will plop in all the services that's required, the infrastructure corridor. And then it's going to go to the hands of the architects who's going to put in the building footprint. And then the balance of that is what you work on. That's what he told me. I don't know what to describe the feeling was at the time, but I could say the major feeling I remembered was disappointment. And I tried very, very hard to sort of conceptualize that in my thought and then what is the difference between what we did elsewhere and what we're doing here in the context of our home ground. And I concluded that in this form of this simple diagram. So clients are the project vehicles. These are the people that you will serve, but they really actually consist of all of the other peoples you see, the financial investors, the other stakeholders like landowners, so on and so forth. But you deal mainly with the project vehicle, which is the client. And in the current context of things, rather now still in practice, although there are people who are trying to break away from this, but in the current common way of practice here, we have two stages of consultant groups. The first one is the initial group, and then the second one is the subsequent group. So very often the initial group, now by the way, before I continue, this is in no means to demonize anybody in this table. It's just that the way things were done for so many years. And so it's just something that, as I mentioned, I conceptualized this and then sort of concluded this in the table for everybody to understand. Some of these people don't even know that there are, they should not be, collaborating in this mannerism. So as I was saying, there are two groups of consultants. One is the initial group, and then there's the subsequent group. Commonly in the initial group, if you were, say, for example, doing a development, say a housing estate, you will have the surveyor, the land surveyor, who will, mark up the areas, survey the ownership, and the zoning of the land, so on and so forth. And then this gets passed on to the master planner, who will then carve out, the content of the layout, and bring in the functions, the usable spaces, so on and so forth. And of course, they have a guideline to go by in doing this. And then at the same time, they are being pinched and required by whoever's the owner of the development to, you know, carved out as many profitable areas that they could harness. And so it's always a mix of these two, and the planners always in the best intention will try to fulfill you know, all of the requirements successfully. And once that's done, what will happen is that you move on to the subsequent part of the consultant group. And this is always led by the architect. Now, the architect and the planner interchanges their roles together, but in a more common ground, the architect comes as a bridge in between the initial process and the subsequent process. So under the architecture, under the subsequent process, the architect leads all the other co-consultants, we call them, in the diagram as you see. So you got the other designers like the interior designers, sculpture designers, environmental designers, signage and wayfinding and so on, lightings. And then you got the engineers consisting of the M&E, the mechanical and engineering, mechanical and electrical engineers, the CNS, the civil, you know, the geotechnics and so on. And then you have the landscape architects, and then you have the quantity surveyors. And in the common process of doing things, you know, the flow of the works goes like this, as you can see on this table. So from the initial stage, the surveyors pass it to the planner to the architect then, you know, transmit the vision down to the other groups of people, and then it goes to the quantity surveyors, who then will control on the, you know, leading it towards the implementation. And then, you know, it goes back to the client after it's been completed, before the client then sells it or surrenders it or hands this over to whoever is the end user. Now, when you look at this table in a orderly way, everything is in place. But when you are talking about exchange of ideas, when you're talking about continuity of vision, it doesn't really reflect that. It doesn't really do that. You know, for example, I've had an experience, just to share it with you. You know, a planner comes up with the first cut of the idea. He calls the project Green Urban Canopy. I think that's what he calls it. Because of certain reasons of the planning backgrounds of the project, so they call it Urban Canopy. It got passed to the architect. The architect saw different potentials, you know, saw different ideas, and he tweaked it a little bit, and then they call it Forest Terrace or Fort Terrace or something like that. And then it got passed down to the other co-consultants, and the landscape architect wished to take a take on that, and then the landscape architect changed it to vivarium. And then finally, because of cost cutting by the quantity surveyor, you know, it became something else, and you cannot call you know, a project a forest or vivarium if you only have 3 numbers of trees. So in the end, you know, it's up to the marketing people to name it otherwise, and so they name it with something else. But you can see how a vision start off very strongly, sometimes gets watered down if you go by this kind of structure, because you keep on passing the baton, and then the information either don't transfer to the next person, or the vision is not shared by the next person. Now, how I wish to work, and is my dream team process, and as what I have gone through to date, would be this very simple diagram. Nobody's really on top of anybody. Everybody is cohesively sharing and talking and communicating. And this is what I've been through working with some of the other projects in the past, and we managed to deliver the vision at the end. So it's always is a shared kind of effort. So in this context, you see how the client and the consultants are actually working together almost at the same level, you know, because it's always an exchange. The client has their vision, usually it's market driven, and then you have the consultants who's result driven, but one cannot step onto the other. It's always have to be, you know, an understanding of it. I know it sounds quite utopian, but all the projects that I showed you earlier, they are all successful because of this sort of relationship, and therefore it is not impossible to do it. And so, you know, from the consultant's point of view, as you can see, all of them are working cohesively together. So, you know, you have the surveyor, you know, constantly advising the planner, and then the planner comes out with their vision, and then the architect gives their input on the matter. You have the engineers, you know, telling in terms of the infrastructure, and then the landscape architect giving their inputs, and so on and so forth. And then all together comes to the point where, you know, we bring into implementation, and then we deliver it cohesively to the end user. So nobody is saying, okay, so this is the client's fault, or this is the consultant's fault, because at the end of the day, it's all about something that all of us can be proud of. Okay, so moving on, making it matters. And why I call it making it matters is because I think a simple vision as wanting to have a greener environment, greener place where you live in, has to matter enough that we must make the change. It has to be something that draws, our attention, and then we are willing to, sometimes change tradition, and then even to the point of challenge convention, as what I just demonstrated to you in the 2 diagrams that I shared. As I mentioned, not many people like it. Then I had my fair share of getting lashed back, but I'm continuously pursuing it because in the belief that it has been successful elsewhere, and those who had collaborated with each other in the same mannerism can, can testify that that method of working works really, really well. Before I continue on to the next slides, I just want to, break it a bit by drawing your attention to this term, mise en place. It's a French term usually used in kitchen by chefs. It's a process prior to cooking. So chefs usually go through mise en place before they actually, cook the food. Mise en place is really the collation of the ingredients, the preparation of the ingredient before they actually cook it. So most chefs would have their mise en place, conventional chefs would have their mise en place happening in the kitchen, where, the ingredients are being sent to the kitchen, and then they just, cook it and produce the food. Excuse me. But the more successful chef, or chefs that you can see, successfully bring new innovation onto, their industry, actually believe that mise en place has to start way before, things are being delivered to the kitchen. And I find this process to be very, very interesting. And so I also apply this kind of things in the work I do. I have my own version of mise en place, where, we would go as far as planting our own trees. Sometimes we go and, study how plant grows, get samples, study their biology, look at stones and rocks and all those kind of things. And in order to understand how they are, how they work, so that whenever we try to apply them in our developments, we know that there are certain challenges that we have to deal with. And then whenever we need to collaborate with other people, we would know how to advise them, how to bring them forth to achieving, the kind of vision that we want to achieve. So as Dr. Cairo mentioned, I've done some of these projects. I just want to show you a sample of them, but these developments are all achieved in the same manner of process that I shared with you just now. They have all been collaborated successfully with, all the co-consultant teams in a cohesive sort of way. So this is the one and only Desaru Coast. The architect is Kerry Hills, the late Kerry Hills. It's a resort that's been carved out from a forest, an existing forest. It's a functioning ecosystem, and we had to sensitively look at how to apply, the design visions and the plans together. And then there are all of these existing trees. There are animals living on them that we have to be careful about. But the process that we went through in trying to achieve the same vision, saw how we had to shift and tweak and move, layouts of buildings, open spaces, infrastructures. And it happened through a process that was rather, I would say, prolonged, but it achieved the kind of results we needed. So for example, the swimming pool wasn't always there. I mean, it's something that came because there was an opportunity, there was a crack in between the view, towards the sea, and then everybody just thought, hey, we should move the lobby here. And that sort of thing, but it's not something that can happen if it's just one person saying, let's move the lobby here, and everybody else just go, creak, creak, that nobody's gonna listen to you. So you have to have a team that's willing to be a part of the bandwagon and, share your vision. And then we also have the Archwalk Shanghai. Now, this is a project that I had a bit of an argument with the architect at the beginning. The architect is Portman, they're from New York. And was it from New York? I think from Boston. Well, they're from the United States nonetheless. But Well, we had all of these trees that we brought into, the roof gardens, the rooftops, which at the beginning was a huge challenge because structures were required to be reinforced. And then, drainage systems had to be thoroughly thought through. The drains were previously designed on the rooftop for, simple runoffs and then discharge through the normal gutter. But having all of these things means that we have to have something that's more complex, something that can cater to uncertain amount of not just water but also dirt and leaves and other things that may be the result of having a different kind of layout and components. And so of course this posed a big challenge to the project team. At the beginning it was hard because people were not sharing the same vision. So we wanted to bring trees up on the roof. The structural engineers advised us the opposite. And then the architect doesn't want us to disturb the facade because then it's going to make it look, ugly, and it's going to cover their expensive material. So at the end of the day, we had to present our case as to why we felt this was needed. And this is when the mise en place process, this is when understanding, things are important. The context by which this particular development took place are all surrounded by tall architecture. So everybody looked down and see this particular development. And it's actually a shopping mall. But if you look from the top view down, it's very unenticing. It looks like, a cheese with holes being eaten by rats. And so, you have to bring in some softening factor to it. And then this can only be done if we can introduce some greeneries and give spaces that were non-functional before functions, that then makes it more sensible for this development to be designed this way, because there's so many changing levels, but it doesn't make sense to have people looking from one level to another and only seeing, a flat, empty surface. So it was something that we had to go through a process, making our case heard, convincing them. But this is another knowledge that you have to understand and you have to have when you go out to practice, to trying to convince people. But you may not be able to do that if you don't understand what you're trying to do. So again, understanding what you're doing, the mise en place, having a clear vision is something that you must hold on to very, very dearly as you practice. Ri Hong Tian Di, this is another project that we brought in greeneries into the development, but this was after Archwalk Shanghai. So we've learned a trick or two, and we're able to manage the architect to see our vision, and the architect also shared the same vision as we did. And so it was easy, and it was, I would say, an easy application. But we could only put a little bit compared to Archwalk Shanghai because of, a structural limitation. There is a train track underneath. There's a subway underneath here. So the vibrations would cause, cracks and that sort of thing. So we cannot have too many movement in the architecture. So we were limited as to where we could actually put those trees. But nonetheless, as you can see, there were good exchanges, people advising everybody correctly. You want this vision to come true. Yes, we will support you, but there are this limitation that you need to adhere to, and so on and so forth. So nobody is saying that, oh, I come first, my scope says this, and then you follow me, I give you my drawings, you draw on it, and then that's all there is to it. No, if you want to have a cohesive result, everybody has to, work in a round table sort of method and then exchange ideas and then share the effort together. So making it matters, again, sharing an experience. This is Chongqing Raffles City. Now, for those of you listening in, I've moved to the final part of my slides. I hope you're happy that we're coming towards the end of it. But this is just to show you the process that we went through. I picked some images of what you call this, the project when we were under the construction stage. But this is something that I hold dearly to me because it's a project that I had the wonderful opportunity of working with the great Moshe Safdie. He's the guy that you see in the picture. He's the guy who did the Marina Bay Sands. And as I mentioned, he shared everybody's vision, everybody's idea, and we were able to deliver what we needed to deliver successfully. Now, you see how this building is quite similar to Marina Bay Sands because he was the guy who designed it. But why he went on for the same method of the design is not because he copied the success of the previous one and brought it over. A lot of people said that. If you Google Moshe Safdie Chongqing Raffles City, Moshe Safdie spelled M-O-S-H-E, Safdie, and he's Chongqing Raffles City. There are a lot of forums discussing on how this is a repeat of Chongqing, of Marina Bay Sands. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, he applied a vision that was successful. And I have to explain briefly to you why this happened. So Moshe, well, he's Hebrew, as I mentioned. He's an offspring of somebody who suffered through the atrocity during the, what do you call this? The atrocity, the war. So he grew up for a while in an environment that was harsh before he moved to Canada. And then ever since then, when he had the kind of life he knew later on, he comparing it with what he didn't have from where he was from, he believes the value of, having green. To him, it's luxury. And there is no way that he's going to, destroy things if he doesn't have to. And he always chooses not to want to do it. So when he was doing Marina Bay Sands, same as when he was doing this development, this particular site used to have an open space, just like the Marina Bay Sands. And people used to go there, and do different recreational activities. So to the urban perspective of things, if you look at the urban grain, there is a green spot in that plan. And what he didn't want to do is to put a building footprint on it and then wiped out that grain of greeneries in the urban context. But yet at the same time, the requirement for his building is so massive that it's hard for him to still have an open space. So what he does as a formula is, if he couldn't have it on the ground level, he'll bring it up onto a different elevation. And so that is the logic behind the design that he did for the Marina Bay Sands. Of course, then later on, the operator decided to turn it private. That's a different story. And not many people could access it. But the intention, or the vision of his design is to actually continue with what is the existing urban grain. And if the urban grain has already been seen, as a prevailing and accepted understanding by, whoever was the user or is the user, he wants to keep it that way, even if there's changes coming into it later on. So the same thing happened here for Chongqing Raffles City in his vision. He still wants to continue that. He still wants to allow the locals to come. So as much as possible, he wants to bring in all of these greeneries. So one of the steps that he did was to elevate, the missing green from the footprint onto the sky level. And thus, it gave rise to the solarium, or the sky garden, which I am very happy to be given the opportunity to work on. So, looking at the other angle of it, just now I was showing you, the vision, the design of it when it was a drawing. So today, actually the project is completed, but partially open now. There's time that you can go up there, and then most of the time it's closed because they're still furnishing the other parts of the towers. In this view, you don't see much greens because this was taken during, I think, 65 to 68% completion of the whole construction. So they built first all of the main structures. So you don't see much greeneries on the footprint, but we have started to bring in, the greeneries onto the sky garden. So this is the vision that we had. And when we first started, well, Moshe sketched a few things. He wanted to bring all of these palm trees. We told him palm don't grow so well in Chongqing because it's a different weather, it's temperate. But then he said it's going to be a controlled environment. So, we had to contain the temperature within the solarium at a constant 23 to 26 degrees throughout the whole entire year. So it was possible to do that. And so this is when it's finished. This is when we first completed it. We took a picture of it. So just to show you how from the vision, we strongly maintain it and then try to execute that as close as possible. And this was not be made possible if we had our way of thinking and he would have his way of thinking, the engineers would have their way of thinking. We would not be able to get something from a very simple, vision into reality. But this was made possible because everybody held hands. And then, I mean, the way I say this, like everybody's so happy. We had our fair share of arguments. We had our fair share of, blamings and so on. But what's core to the effort is everybody stick on to the vision and try to maintain the direction as best as possible. So this is a vision of what was thought of to be in one of the pool areas with the big trees. And we traveled as far as Vietnam and Thailand trying to look for trees that would fit the vision. And we managed to bring them into the development. So this is the finished product, what it looks like, close to what you saw just now, but it's something that we try to hold on to the vision as best as we can. Okay, and then you have this vision of the solarium of the Sky Garden with a swimming pool, and this is the image once it's completed. It's always again about achieving that vision. I have some images later on that I will show you. Now you see all of the beautiful pictures. It's as if that this thing just happened. Actually, they didn't. They went through this process. Now, in normal format of construction, the landscape comes in at the end. And I must tell you, and again, this is not in a way of criticizing, but I hope the coming generations of professionals in whichever field you are in understands that we have to come to a point where the project is what matters. The vision is what matters. It's not whose name is on this development at the end of the day. And so sometimes, we are being given chuffs to the end. Like, for example, okay, once everything is done, then you bring in the trees. But then there's always a problem. In our case, we understood the process. We understood what's good for the project, what's good for the trees. As I mentioned, we've done a bit of the mise en place. And then we said that everything has to come in before the finishings were laid. Everything has to come in before all the structural services were finally laid and operated. As with, the opposite of things that happen in most cases where, because we came in last, it's either we are limited or we can't do much with it. So in this case, as you can see, things were not really yet completed, materials were not yet in place, structures were still happening, but we brought all of these things into context, into trying to make them work. Okay, so we have this image showing you just now, the swimming pool that you saw in the image with all the finishing, but in this visual, it's actually still in its finishing and it's not yet fully completed. But we've already started to bring in, all the trees, and then we had to test them, see how they acclimatize to the situation. There's also the reasons why we advise the project team to bring the trees in first before everything else is settled, as I mentioned, which would be the case of a normal development process. But in this case, we advise that the trees comes in first because they require acclimatization since they were from other regions. And so, if we had to move them at some point later on for whatever troubles that we might come across, it's going to be problematic since we've closed the roof, we've activated the, the artificial environment over it. So understanding of the project is key, and getting our co-consultants to respect and assist us in doing that is also vital. So in this regard, in this project example, we were able to get that done, with great supports from everybody. And then once our trees have successfully been acclimatized, there were, confirmation that we don't require to change them or to move them, we could dismantle the crane that brought them up there in the first place. By the way, dismantling of cranes is a big deal when you work and when you practice. In the future, you'll know what that means when somebody says we have to dismantle the crane. It is a scary thing because then that means nothing can go up there anymore. If they need to, then it's going to be a whole new process, which is going to be expensive. And so in this regard, once the trees have been successfully acclimatized, and then we can then continue processes. Now, in this image is the testing of the waterproofing before the final material is being laid. Sometimes I also find it. Now, this is not what I normally do, but I find there's some ways of practices here where people put in all the finishing in first for people, for example, before they actually test whether it's leaking or not supposed to be the case. So you got to test it first. If it's not leaking, then only you install the finished material. Okay, so images of all the trees that we brought into the Sky Garden, trees that were hoisted up from the crane. And then these are trees that suits the design we had, the multi-branching style. And as you can see, the size of the root ball, all been thoroughly coordinated in terms of the weight of the trees, in terms of the growth habit, whether they are going to be invasive at some point, what can be done to contain their growth to a certain extent, which trees would be allowed to grow naturally, so on and so forth. So we had a table of a study of the different characters and the growth and the ways that the trees would actually live on through the process of its current situation and into the future. So again, a thorough understanding would be important, and we explained this all to the architects, the co-consultants, the clients who, upon understanding of what we were trying to do, were able to plan on with their parts of the work. So once everything is put in place, everything is nicely settled, we could then collate and then finish this development and deliver the results that everybody envisioned for at the beginning. So when you go over, if you have the opportunity, it seems like it's almost effortless, like as if the tree's always been there, as if like, somebody put a seed on and it just grew and things like that. But in actual fact, it requires a great deal of collaborations, a great deal of understanding, a great deal of sharing, and vision respecting. There are numbers of co-consultants that I'm happily working with today here in Malaysia that are now moving along that line. You have, if you've heard of people like, for example, Dr. Tandukman, and some of the names, these are people who would like to be a part of the whole vision of the process, Dr. Ken Yang and so on, who from the very beginning would want a cohesive vision be set. I was in a meeting with Dr. Ken Yang earlier this year before the pandemic hits. Remember being schooled by him across the table because I said something wrongly with regards to topsoil and land clearing and so on and so forth. And I was reminded very quickly that that's how people of great vision often wants to do things, and that's to have a great vision at the beginning, and then that vision is shared and understood by everybody, and then carried on to the next processes. So, more images of how we ventured into bringing the trees into the context and how we could successfully apply them into the design finally. So as I mentioned, if you go there, you could see as if, things have always been there, but in actual fact, they don't. Trees don't grow up on the sky level, so there must be a great deal of work to bring them over to this level. So I think I'll conclude my sharing at this point. Maybe you have questions or thoughts that you wish to throw in, and I will be happy to respond as best as I could. So thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you very much, Daniel, for your sharing. And I think it's very interesting that you give some lights and also some direction for our students, especially. Of course, there are some of them already in the industry, but most of them is still looking and also will later in the industry. So I hope, student, we now having a session, Q&A session. So I would like to open for to the floors for any question. So we do have one question here from Nazar Mansour. So if I can read here. Hi, sir. How do you design the landscape of the building? Do you design the building or the landscape first? Or is it an ongoing process, ongoing designing process between both?
Well, thank you, Nazar, for the question. I would tell you, for me, it's both at the same time. But of course, as I mentioned, the process of how we often do things here is that you get it after somebody else has worked on it, and of course you can't work on the design if, for example, the architect hasn't provided the massing for the building, hasn't quite put in place some of the components. But upon receiving that, you could work your ideas, your thought, and then share it back with either the architect or the planners or the engineers, and then having them to respond to that ideas. Of course, as I said, it's a collaboration, and as with all collaborations, you have to be prepared to be challenged and then to be questioned. And if your vision or your ideas aren't quite logical to some extent, or they pose a certain degree of threats, and you've got to be prepared to be able to withdraw or that sort of thing. But again, a dialogue needs to happen. So I would say it's a continuous process. It will start from somewhere. Like nobody can start it at the same time on an empty drawing. So it's always have to begin. But then you must always be able to come back. As I mentioned, the bad experience I had when I first started in 2012 here in Malaysia was I was being told, you got to wait for your turn. So that was very painful. But over the years, I've met other people who were able to allow that bouncing of ideas, that bouncing of thoughts to happen, which I'm happily saying has helped a lot in the process. So it's a continuous process, because you will always come through some kind of issues, or certain things unravel, other people bringing in their riches of ideas and their thoughts along the way. And then this is always something that needs to be looked up to, and then be included in the process.
So, okay, thank you. Okay, ada lagi tak question, please, student? We still have more time. In fact, we have 1 hour lagi ni. Cepat you present.
Was I too quick?
Yes, you too quick. And in fact, I have received a message from my student asking for more. If you can have more of your presentation, I mean, probably if you can have more, 1 or 2 slides of your, of your project, current what you're doing. Probably if you have, and you can share also.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's take the question and see first, and then.
Okay. So okay. Okay. Now we have another question from Najmi, Muhammad Najmi. Hi, sir. As we know, there's always an argument with having trees inside the building, like a maintenance and the tidiness inside the building. Can I have your opinions about this?
Yeah, that's a very valid question. As a professional who works a lot with trees, this is something that you cannot disagree with. I mean, trees have its own process. It's an organism that goes on living like us. So, we have littering habits, we have processes of changes that we have to go through. But again, as I said, and then this goes back to the person asking the question, it's understanding what you're trying to do is important. So, for example, people always lump trees onto one named tree. but actually they come in different kinds of, you know, species, and they all have different ways of growing and habit of littering and so on. And this is where knowledge is important. Like in my case, I try to make it, you know, as often as I can, a practice to go and learn as much as we could about trees. We go to the nurseries, for example, we observe trees that we can see around us, and we see how they grow, how they drop their leaves, and, you know, that sort of thing. And then when we try to do something along that vision, we try to bring in trees that would be suitable to the context. So for example, you know, I had a client who loves so much this one particular tree. We call this here in Malaysia, it's called kayu arang, but in scientific it's Cryptoxylum caucasianensis. So it's actually a tree that is very popular at the moment because it's a beautiful tree, but it has, you know, a very heavy littering habit. It drops the leaves like tons of them, and you know. It's a high maintenance sort of tree, but because it's popular, everybody loves it. Everybody wants to use it in their development. And I had that experience where I had to tell, you know, the client that, listen, you know, for what you're trying to do, bringing Cryptoxylum into, or the kayu arang tree into your development may not be the right way. And so we went on to a process where, you know, there was a bit of an argument. It was a bit of an exchange of disagreement, and I had to, you know, sometimes you have to take extra effort, and this is where I think, you know, not only the current world we're living in is very well, it's awesome because you can just access the internet, so you can, you know, access the internet and show whoever that you need to share with, you know, for example, on this kayu arang tree is what I did, you know, that this tree has this particular so and so habit, and then I even brought the client over to see, you know, a live sample of the tree and then explain that this is what you're going to get. You know, if you want to bring this tree into wherever that you want to bring in, this is what you're going to get. And so, you know, he said, okay, yeah, so I'll listen to you now. But it's a process. It's a long effort, a lot of things you have to do if you want to get your vision across. And, you know, you have to have, I don't know how to say this to you, passion and patience at the same time. You have to have conviction that's strong enough, and knowledge is key. You always must not be, you know, tired in finding knowledge and information, because they will help you in guiding whoever that you're working with. So to answer your question, if I can just conclude everything I just said, is number one, to understand trees, the kind of trees, the type of trees, the suitability of the trees with the environment that you're trying to plant them in. And not just to follow what's in the market, what's trendy to do because you saw it on the magazine, that's what you want to do. Don't go along that line. Do it because you believe in it, because you know it can be done. And then when you are being questioned and you're being argued upon with whether this is going to work, this is going to, you know, destroy the place, it's going to, you know, dirty the area, then you have, you know, an understanding to say, no, it's not going to go up to that extent, so on and so forth. So I hope that answers, you know, your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for the next question from Sharif Ashraf. Okay, in applying landscaping, what is the criteria, or it is important to have enough ventilation for the building?
Sorry, again, can you repeat?
In applying landscaping, what is the criteria, or is it important to have enough ventilation for the building? I think ventilation probably related to the for the landscaping, or you know, in a way that I think what he's trying to mention to tell here is not ventilation. Well, maybe more of the what do you call this? The requirement or the needs of the trees. I think. Is it that what you are asking, Shahir? if you can. Yes, Shahir.
I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the basic elements that you need in order for a tree to survive. Of course, you need water. You need first the growth medium. That would be either the soil or, you know, things that are what do you call this? Well, where the particular plants need to grow, some in the water, some in soil. So you have to first have the medium, enough sufficiency to create the space for the medium. And then, of course, you need to have those, you need to have water, you need to have enough light, you need to have air, so on and so forth. But again, as I mentioned, there are trees of different nature. So you have trees that are shaded, shade tolerant, we call them. There are trees that are light-centric, photocentric, that requires a lot of light. There are also trees that, requires a lot of exposure to air because of their biological system and their function. So to answer your question, if I can be as objective as possible here, is you can do it both ways. Okay, you can either have an environment that is to suit what you're trying to do, or you suit what you're doing with the environment that is created, and this comes on a situation to situation basis. So, for example, if somebody tells me we need to green a space that's underneath the highway, for example, and you have the elevated highway, and it's the space underneath is being blocked by by the structure from getting enough light, so it's all shaded. So I cannot go over and specify plants that will not grow in that condition. So the importance of understanding the place where you're doing things is also key. So you have to go experience the site, I think, as much as you can, especially when you're doing landscaping. You have to understand the genius loci of the place, the weather, the air, and so on. Of course, ventilation is not necessarily natural, because what the plant needs is the chemical component in the air itself. Either it's the carbon dioxide or it's the oxygen, depending on the different times of the day and the different levels of the processes in which the particular tree is in. So as long as you can supply that sufficiently for the need of the tree, then that should be okay. But of course, I mean, in our tropical environment, having great access to air, it's always good to get ventilation. But in the event you can't, it won't mean that the tree will not survive. But as long as you could provide for what it requires in its biological and chemical process, then that should be okay. I hope I'm answering.
Yeah, we hope you're answering also. Okay, now we go to the next question. I think I go with this one first. Hi, sir. I like the idea of green lung in the design, but how do you think about agriculture in the public building? Agriculture.
Wonderful. This is something that I'm exploring myself. When I mention about having greens, of course, they're not just limited to ornamental greens and the kind of greens that you use for shades and so on, like for things like that. But it could also be greens that you could actually benefit from directly, like such as plants that you grow in agriculture, and then the result of having good architecture. I think this is something that a number of developments in the world are also going towards. Currently, more in the West. Several that I've come across in Shanghai, which is in Asia. I'm not so aware of if there's any here in Malaysia. Perhaps there are, but I haven't actually come to notice them. Unfortunately, maybe I need to travel more. But yes, my idea and my thought of having agriculture happening within the context that you're living in, especially within a building, is something that's definitely require more opportunity to happen. Definitely something that is really good, especially now. When the current pandemic, as it has happened, taught us one great lesson, and that is to design our living environment very, very carefully. Because you never know when you cannot leave your houses. I mean, this is what I learned. And then, you know, with the limitations that I have in the apartment, I can't have much things to grow in. And that's a big disappointment, especially you cannot go out, and, you know, you got to have basic greeneries in your living environment. And if you can plant things that you can eat, it would be even greater. Yeah, so it gives a lot of rise to thinking along that line. But I do think it's an awesome idea. I think, you know, someone ought to forward this into something that will become eventually a common thing.
Okay, thank you. So the next question from Hani, Hani, fourth year student. Question about landscape maintenance for greens, water, hard landscape. Is there any significant or common issue arising after the project completion which need your intervention? Can you please share your experience and way of solution? Thank you.
Well, it happens often. It has happened. Well, not in the works that I have done, but I have come across situations where we were asked to assist. From what we've experienced, there are several kinds of problems. Okay, so I'm just trying to just break them down and then share this with you. It's not just about the maintenance of, you know, like the cleanliness of things, not just about that. Sometimes it's also to do with structural, how do you say, compromisation, you know, that what the landscape did in terms of its growth. It disturbed the structural integrity and compromised the whole building safety. Some even broke into services and then impede the function of things. So you have problems along that line. And these are, I would say, in the more severe side of things. And then you also have trees that we've come across. People ask us to help them along that line, where, you know, they fell, you know, like one of the branches broke and dropped right in the middle of everybody else. And then the smaller side of problems would be on the, you know, cleanliness of it. I've came across all situations. In one particular development, which unfortunately I can't share with you the name, because then you're going to know, because it's been done by other people. So I want to stay neutral as possible. But the previous person designing for that didn't understand the biology, the background of the trees, the growth habits, and so on. And as I said in my earlier answer, brought in the species of the trees not following, you know, what truly can work in that particular space. So, you know, trees of unsuitable species were being brought in, and then, you know, you've got these kind of problems happening. So they were aggressive species. You know, for example, the ficus tree, which roots will just go everywhere, were being planted in an area that was not supposed to be. So when you have all of these different problems, you have to assess the situation. And I have had situations where my solution was to remove the tree. As much as I am a tree hugger, when they're done in the right way, we would have to remove them. So it's very important that, you know, from the very beginning, we get the right idea of things, that we understand it properly before we do it, because then that saves us the problem of killing the tree at the end of the process. And this is what has happened. It's a very real problem. It's a very, very real problem, and it's constant. And that's why I don't really blame a lot of people when, you know, they want to stay away from trees and that sort of thing. But it's, again, because of understanding. And, you know, when we work together, you know, for example, if I were to bring in certain types of trees, you know, the designers that I've worked with, you know, in the projects that I did, that I showed you just now, they would ask me, like, for example, Moshe Safdie's team asked me, like, how will the tree turn into, what will the tree turn into in 5 years? You know, is it going to be the way it's like that, or it's just going to turn into a different kind of monster? So that posed a strong question, and we had to go back and study and understand it. And And then we say, okay, so this tree we need to change because you're right, it's going to destroy whatever that we're doing, and then that tree will work. So again, you know, a cohesive way of working together is important, and it's supposed to be enriching as you go on through the process. So, you know, that will save you from facing maintenance problems at, you know, at the end. But if you do face them nonetheless at the end because of, you know, weak planning, wrong executions, then, you know, you have to be prepared to up to a point where you have to say, we need to remove the trees. And that's is the last thing I want, but that is something that you would have to prepare to do if it's not in the right direction.
Okay, so now we have two questions from Lo Shanshan. So the first question is, I saw an article that mentioned certain types of trees that are not suitable to grow in high-rise building, as those part of plant may not grow or die. Okay. May we know the right plant type of plants or trees that's suitable in high-rise building? That is the first question. And the second one is, may we know if the green facade or green wall can replace brick wall in certain area by consider the raining problem? Okay.
Sorry, I don't quite understand the second question.
The second question,
Yeah.
may we know if the green facade or green wall can replace brick wall as wall, yeah, in certain area by considering the raining problem? The raining, I mean, the tempias, tempias.
Right.
Yeah, or heavy raining that we probably have here.
Okay. I'll answer first the first question. Yes, definitely. As I mentioned, you know, there are different types of trees. They're all, you know, for different purposes. And there are trees that are not suitable for you to bring them, you know, not only to the high-rise location, but also within, you know, a confined environment. Trees up on the high-rise levels, there are several reasons why, as to why they may not be suitable. One is because of the growth habit itself. You know, they require certain kinds of environment. You know, some trees, they cannot be exposed to, you know, prolonged exposure to wind and that sort of thing. There are also trees that are, you know, very affected by the science bit of it. And this is something I have to explain to you. You know how sometimes people ask me, if you have green walls, and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but after a while, you know, the top part of the plants just doesn't seem to survive. Is it because, you know, well, whatever reason? But you know, one of the main reasons is because of gravity. Like even us human, as you go up higher onto a certain elevation, you know, you may not feel it directly, but your body is being pressured into a certain degree of tests. And plants, you know, they are very simple in terms of their, you know, biological function. You know, up to a certain level, they may not be able to take this, you know, because sometimes, you know, they pull water or nutrient, you know, and anti-gravity, and then just doing that is already a challenge for them. And then you put them on a higher elevation, and scientifically we learn the higher you go, you know, the different the pressure of gravity can have on you. So sometimes it's the gravity issue that you have, and that's why the higher you go with the elevation, the more difficult it is to deal with for the plants. And you have sometimes people doing green walls, they start the medium on one floor, and then they want the tree to grow up until, you know, 3 to 4 floor, which will not happen. And because of the nutrient challenge and so on and so forth. So understanding that is very important, not just on, you know, knowing the trees perhaps, but you also must know its biological limitation. Same goes to, you know, trees that are up on the roof or on the higher elevation. Again, you have to learn to understand them. And what I have come across knowing to date, be it by asking around, by observing, by learning and reading, several trees that you know, that we've seen being successfully used. And you know, for example, I would say trees like Tristania or or you know, Cisopenia not so, because the leopard tree, yeah, sometimes up on certain elevation they don't work well anymore. You know, but trees that we have seen, like Surigada, all of this, they are better in terms of their chances of growth. And I haven't actually have the reason why, but just, you know, I was talking about this with my team, I think last week. I just suspect, you know, because when you go up, say for example, on Cameron Highlands, the higher you go, you see how the plant changes in terms of their, how do you say, species, and also in terms of, you know, their looks. And, you know, if you try to bring something from the lower ground up to Cameron Highlands, for example, it may not work because of the change of the temperature and so on. So learning from that also can help you to, how do you say, make the right selection for the trees. Tristania is because it's one of the forest species that's commonly found, and it's, I reckon it's one of the reasons why they are, you know, multi-elevation capable. But yeah, the kind of trees, you know, you have to see, you have to understand the kind of species they are. And then you have to also see, you know, trees that have very strong root system, like for example, you know, rain trees and all of this, you know, that they have very strong connection with their medium. You know, for example, the soil, if they grow in the soil, so you know they don't do well if you move them up onto another elevation, because then they require, you know, that sort of medium to grow in. So just judging and learning from how you see them in their context, you know, gives you clues sometimes as to whether they would be suitable outside of the normal situation that you would see them. And you know, trees with maybe less aggressive roots can do much better in a more confined planter boxes up on the roof deck. So, you know, they would probably do much better than the ones that you see having a more, how do you say, complex root system and so on. Yeah, it's again about understanding of the species, learning about the species, observation, you know, of what can actually work. In terms of your second question, I'm not quite sure if you're saying, well, if I'm not looking at it from a structural perspective, I would say you can replace a brick wall with a green wall, because if it's just to work as a screen, as a, you know, if it's were to just function as a screen, it can. If it were to work as a space segregation, it can. But if you're asking from a structural perspective, then this is something we have to see from the bigger context of the structure of the building, whether you are depending upon that wall to work as a structure for it. And this is something that, you know, I would have to answer you by saying, you know, we have to see the bigger context of how the structure works. If it's just a small pavilion, for example, you know, on top of it is not so many, not a lot of weights to carry, then it's doable, provided, you know, the green wall itself that you use to build with consist of members that would be able to withstand what you're carrying. But if it's solely to replace something that's structural, I think it requires other components to do that. But if it's just to function as a space segregator, you know, for shelters, yes, it can work. And then in fact, some people have done it. Tadawando has done it. Kisho Kurikawa has also done it. You know, where they use living walls in replacement of the normal walls that we would see, for the reason that they want the building to have, you know, better, what do you call this, ventilation. And then also, of course, what do you call this, good sense of greeneries, and then more relaxing outlook. So yes, you can, but it will have to depend on to which extent you're replacing it for.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Daniel. I hope Shanshan, Daniel is answering your question. I know the question. The second question is actually looking on the angle whether this kind of wall is actually can help in terms of when we talk about the heavy rain that we have. So that is basically the question. What do you think actually?
Oh, whether you mean if it can protect you from the
I think from the question something like that. I assume.
Well, I would say yes, it could, because yes, it could. Depends on how you design it. Of course, if you have a gap, of course, water would still come through. But for example, if you have member of the wall that's say arranged at 300 mm each, and then in between that you put in your planting components. If you calculate in terms of the angle of how the rain comes in. So for example, if your planter box, your mini planter box that you hang onto the wall is approximately 300, for example. So the next one up probably has to be lesser than 300, because otherwise your 45-degree of the rain will still surpass, if you understand. So if you have, this, and then the other one is 300, and the width is also 300. The rain will still surpass. But if you actually increase the width, maybe you do a 600 mm wide, but 300 mm depth, then as the rain comes in at 45 degrees, it will manage to prevent, the water from spilling internally. So it can work, definitely can work, but it's how you come about to designing it and then making it as a shield as much as it is open. Because the same way as you design a louver, it really is like a louver, except the louver is actually a planter. So air and light can still come through, but as it rains, it gets blocked up by the angle of the louver and the depth of it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, I think that's good enough. Okay, so because you kind of like have a lot of question here. You kind of very popular. So now I'm going to the next question. So this is coming from Miza Raimi. This is our fourth year student. Hi, sir. How do we select species of vegetation in urban forest strategy?
How do we select species of trees?
Species of vegetation. Yeah, vegetation. She mentioned here vegetation in urban forest strategy.
Oh, first of all, we need to assess the context that we're going to have the urban forest in. That's the first thing. Why I say you have to assess the context is because I just want to share with you, although it's a small experience, but it could mean a bigger problem in the long run. We had an experience somewhere in a place called Lac-Stamari. This is actually in Montreal, where the city or the city hall was trying to reforest a part of the city, and they brought in all kinds of species of trees from the nearby wilderness and the nearby forest. And this new forest is actually in the heart of a particular township. What happened was they had moose, those animals with the big
moose.
cane, and then they got hit by cars, and then animals started coming in, and then this was a disaster, and then they had to remove the trees. So you need to ask yourself up to which extent you're reforesting this for, the context by which you're going to have the forest in. So if it's on the edge of something that's not requiring things to cross over, probably you can do that. But if you're going to bring it to the middle of the city, you're going to have squirrels. Squirrels are one of the, people usually use birds as, indicator, yeah, for successful naturalization in urban spaces, but squirrels are also one of them, because they can actually domesticate themselves quite easily. And you tend to invite them, and not just them. Sometimes you got birds, you got all the other animals. Do you want this? This is something you have to ask yourself. So if you want them, then you got to bring in species that will attract them. If you don't want them, then you need to be careful with not having those kind of combinations. Of course, that's one part of it. And then you have to look at, what are those trees for? What are, the kind of effects that they will do to the environment. There was one time ago when I was in Melbourne, Australia, and this is an experience I just want to share. I was staying in a particular area, and I didn't know why. I had this very dizzy spell. I was just walking outside for a bit, and I had this very dizzy spell. And I went into a cafe, and I asked the guy, what happened? No, he asked me what happened because I was looking a little bit, swaying. And I said, I felt dizzy. And he said, oh, it's because of the eucalyptus. Then I said, what? Because they just planted, the park with a forest of eucalyptus, and eucalyptus tends to, disperse this particular, I don't know what it's called in the air. And when it's too much of it, you kind of get the effect of it. It's like you're walking through an ointment field or something like that. And that was funny. At the same time, it could be dangerous. I mean, people who are allergic to such a situation could get a negative implication of that. So you also have to understand that. You also have to have this criteria. What I normally would do, not just in choosing plants for urban forests, I also do it when selecting plants for normal development, is to actually, again, list what the purposes are for, and then what do I want to achieve at the end of the process. And as I said, if I want certain effects to happen, then I must have certain palettes of plants. If I want to attract birds, I should bring plants that are going to attract them by way of, offering them food and things like that. There are some plants that support in collection of water and the dispersing of water and so on and so forth. So plants are wonderful things. They do different things for you. They can heal the air, they can heal the soil, they can bring in life, they can throw away life, and it's all about you understanding them, and then, bring them in the right combination to whatever your purpose and needs. I hope I'm answering the question.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we go to the next question. Okay, this is from Balkis. Balkis, our third year student. Hi, sir. Do you have any own principle that you apply during design process in order to achieve a good landscape design? Do you have your own specific principle?
I'm not sure if, I always stay by a vision. A vision is always determined by a good dialogue. And, I don't have, I would say, like a me principle, well, I thought I used to have that. But then over the years, I realized it's about making a place successful, making the end user getting what they need. And so it's not about what I hold on to, but I always, if I can, try to, emulate nature. And this is what I always find myself more attracted to doing. I'm not very good at doing things with straight lines, I must tell you that. So it's very often that when I get to work on something, the first line I would draw would be a wiggle or a curve or something, because it's a natural response to wanting something to be more natural. But not always to say that's my principle, but it's just usually what I would respond to almost automatically to something. And then after a sense of dialogue process with whoever that I'm working with, I would be able to outline, a vision, a clearer picture. And that becomes a principle that I would hold on to as I move on to, different projects. But I always respect as much as I can, not just the people I work with, but also, the environment I'm within, the culture I'm within. I try not to I try not to turn things around when they're not necessarily required. And as much as I can, as I said, I try to respect whatever that you're doing for. For example, if I do works in a jungle, I have to do it for a jungle context, and then, for something that could work in that sort of situation. If I do it in an urban space, then I would look into doing it successfully for an urban space. So I do not have a specific principle that I hold on to. I'm always afraid it might turn into ego. So I often hold, to the shared that we often try to build together with other people.
Okay. So now the question from Afini Koyum, third-year student. Hi, sir. My question is the indoor landscape planting approaching towards visual decoration or more towards functionality and space enhancement? What is your...
So you rephrase that question?
The question is about what is your opinion about the indoor landscaping planting, which is, does it more on the visual decoration or more towards functionality and or maybe space enhancement? What do you think? This is the question.
Oh, nowadays I go for function. I'm moving lesser and lesser to doing it for decoration and ornamental purposes. It's for me, it's all about increasing certain degree of qualities of things, either the air, the comfort level and things like that. If there is aesthetic as a result of doing that, it's a bonus. But I don't just simply want to pluck a tree into space and, for the reason that it looks beautiful. It's detrimental to you as well as me, because you may not want to be there. So often I try to do it because of a function.
Okay, that's good. Okay, the next question from one, not so sure which one. Okay, one, hello. From my small point of view, one of the big problem in Malaysia to create a green building is the maintenance itself. We tend to think so much about the maintenance until we can't make the green project like this. How do you about this? I think the opinion about yours about this, your opinion about this, and did the maintenance is far more difficult to be done than the start the green building environment by itself.
Yeah. That's what I said just now. Number one, you have to choose the right kind of vegetation, not to go by what is really in trend or in the market. Like, for example, I find if you want to do a green wall, epiprenum, for example, works perfectly. We call it the dollar plant, or something like that. I don't know, but it's the one that you used to have them in your room back when we were in the university.
Money plant.
Money plants, that's right.
Yeah.
So, so they work in a lot of situations and they require zilch level of maintenance. But problem happens when, we go by aesthetic more than we go by the function of it. Sometimes people say, oh, we want to splash more colors. So they bring in plants unknowingly that they're going to kill you in terms of the maintenance. So you brought them in. And then at the end of the day, because of the challenge and the difficulties of maintaining them, you tend to give people a bad lesson, and a bad impression. And in the future, they stop wanting to do it after a while. But it's because of sometimes our own ignorance of not understanding things and doing it without, real proper understanding. So I've had my fair share of bad mistakes. I must tell you that. I've had my fair share of journey of making people angry at, the things I did. And from that point on, I decided that I got to have enough knowledge for this. So yes, sometimes people did say that my green walls looks boring. I've had people comment, but my green wall lasts the test of time. But that's the outcome of having good understanding. But of course, once you have a palette of what you choose that can work, you can then, how do you say, combine them into something that can artistically be appreciative. But again, it's you choosing the right thing. It's always begin, from choosing the right thing. I saw people using plants like Schefflera arboricola, and they plant this on the higher elevation. It requires soil, and then if your soil, and after a while, runs out of the nutrient, it cannot generate its own nutrient because it's not up down on the ground, it's up in the pot. And you don't add fertilizers, after a while, it's just going to die off. And this is what happened. And, it keeps on repeating. And this is what, sends people off from a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we still have a lot of questions here, but I need, because we are running out of time, you only have like another 10, 11 minutes to go. So
Yeah.
I need to pick one or two questions for you.
Yeah.
So sorry if not for the student who the question that I not read here. Okay, but
Yeah.
I think this one is an interesting question. It's coming from Muhammad. This is interesting. So how do you maintain, support, and back up your own design to be built when there is many unsupport and unwanted help from other professional consultants? Do
Okay,
you?
sorry.
What?
Kind of like, what was the question?
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. How do you maintain, support, and back up your own design to be built when there is many unsupport and unwanted help from other professional consultants? Do you
So
just follow or challenge them? As you said, landscape architect is the last or second last person that will get to design in the project. What is your
okay, so you're saying how do I
yeah.
defend my um kill them? I'm just kidding. No, no, there are days that I wish I could kill people. I wish it's legal. It's not something to do, but now it's unfortunately not the case. I have had some experiences where I came across people who are not very supportive. A lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, it happens a lot more here in Malaysia than it happened elsewhere. Even this morning, I had a meeting with the project team in Vietnam. I'm very surprised with the degree of exploration that they have and the sort of vision that they carry in their heads. I don't get that as much as here in Malaysia, unfortunately. That's why I'm hoping that all of you entering into the industry, whichever corner that you will be in, understand that we are entering into a phase where it's not about an individual achievement. It's always about the cohesiveness of the result at the end. When I experience that kind of rejection, first of all, we must always be open to being rejected, and you must be able to assess your situation. There are rejections that happen because your idea just simply is not feasible. There are also rejection because you're fighting against ego. For the ones that are more related to logical reasoning, and the logical reason can come to, to the reason of cost. It could be because of reasons of complexities and so on. Unfortunately, to those, you have to find a way that you can still, first, you try to size down a bit on that vision. It's disappointing as it may sound, it's better than having none. But then you have to be prepared that some of those things may not be able to be carried through. And then there are reasons, there are situations when the rejection happens simply because it's of ego, that other people just simply don't want to listen to you because for whatever reason, some because they thought that they don't have to listen to you. I'm not trying to, how do you say, create a friction with whoever's listening in. But I've had a lot of cases where, well, first of all, I always fight with engineers. That's the word I'm using is fight, because at one point I wanted to just have a row of trees planted along the street so that we could offer ample shades for people walking and using the street. But I was told it's not possible because of limitations due to services and so on. And I told the engineer, can we move this onto, and then I actually did the study for them in order to explore the possibility. And still I was told it was not possible. And I was so upset that I actually exclaimed at the top of my lung. I said, we've built some of the world's tallest structures. We've dug through under the sea. We've built some of the longest bridges, and then you tell me I cannot move a single pipe from one side to another. It's kind of disappointing, but that's the reality of it that you have to always deal with. I remember having somebody putting a manhole right in the middle of a place that's not suitable for a manhole, and I suggested that the manhole be moved, and I was told that you know, it's like I'm going to cite a revolution, that I'm about to bring down some kind of a government or something like that. And again, I had to think that, you know, we've built some of the world's best, and then yet you're telling me that I cannot move a single manhole. So you got to understand when you, what kind of challenge you have to deal with, and you got to measure yourself against that situation. You know, sometimes you have to fight. You really have to fight in the real sense of it. If you believe in, you know, what you're doing is better, and if you think that it's a mistake to let something goes wrong, if it's really wrong, then you have to fight. And I went in and out of meetings where, you know, I grew, so, what do you call this, horns, in order to defend what I believe in. And of course, what I believe in cannot be based on ego. You cannot fight ego with ego. You cannot think because, oh, I just disagree with this guy, so I want to fight him. But you got to have a basis as to why you think that idea is really important. And when you have that basis, and when that basis is logical enough, then you can fight upon it. Like, for example, when I was doing the resort project, you know, the architect wanted to, well, the architect is not a bad guy. He's done wonderful things, but it's just that where they were going to plonk in the clubhouse was where there's a huge Penaga Lilin, yeah. I think. No, not Penaga Lilin, Penaga Laut, yeah? It's, suddenly I forgot the name, the scientific name, but it's a Penaga Laut tree. It's really big, it's majestic. And I had to tell the guy, hey, you know, you got to move your building a little bit, because otherwise you're going to come into the position of this particular tree. And at one point I was told that, no, it's not going to happen because we want to capture the best, blah, 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 blah. So I got to go back to this guy and I'm going to say, whatever you're building, it's never going to defeat the majestic, you know, quality of that tree. Unless you can tell me that what you're going to do is really going to overcome that, then, you know, you can go ahead and protect your idea. But otherwise, you know, this tree has to stay where it is and you got to move your building. And sometimes you have to fight it with a lot more logic. And then I would advise you, if you come into a point where you get into this kind of argument, try not to let it get into your head and fight it with emotion. Always fight it with logic. So you have to research on the problem. Like I always research on the problem. I you know, for example, the situation with the road that I just told you, I'm not an engineer. So when the engineer says that it's like a big deal, I don't want to dismiss his concern. I want to respect that. So I studied what he was talking about. And then when I studied it, I called the different departments where this was a problem to him, where he said it's going to be a problem to them. And I learned that, no, it's not. It's, you know, you can actually move that. Then I went back to him and I said, hey, listen, this is what you could do. And, you know, and when the person says, oh, no, this cannot be done because so-and-so people said so, then you can say, I spoke to the people and they say it could be done, for example. And if that person still says no, then you know it's ego. And when that happens, then you shoot him. Or no, I'm just kidding. But you have to then increase your effort into fighting him. But you always must begin by first understanding the problem matter, why it's an issue. You know, he might have a point after all at the end of the day. And as I said, if he has a logical point, it brings on to the you know, to the other thing that I mentioned to you just now, rejection through logic. And this is when you kind of have to give way, because otherwise you're not going to work in cohesiveness with people. But most of the time, I try my very best to defend my idea when I believe that that idea would be good. And I try to think of, you know, ideas that would make a particular project work. And because I always started based on that, whenever it's being questioned or being argued upon, I'm almost always able to argue it back. But defending the idea must always begin by first, you know, through a process of logic and so on and so forth. Like, and that's why you have to do a lot of readings. Like sometimes I even, you know, for example, I told somebody, you know, what I just shared with your friend just now on gravity. Even Moshe Safdie, you know, he wanted to plant trees on the balcony of the tower. And, you know, when the meeting was in Boston, I had to tell him, I said, Moshe, it's not going to happen because your building is going to be so high up. you know, the wind is going to just sweep the whole leaves away, and then the plant is just going to die. And when you have that logic, people will listen to you. And you can only have that logic once you understood things a little bit more. So again, knowledge is key, understanding is key, and you know, you cannot just go out and want to fight people because you think I have an idea, I have an ideology, and therefore let's make a change. You cannot just do that. And you got to be prepared as well, as I mentioned, to be able to face a certain degree of rejection. I hope that answer was not disappointing. But
That's good. That's good. I think we go to the last question. Can we, or probably, yeah? Can we go for the last question? So this question is coming from one of our lecturers here, Madam Amira. So I would like your intervention on the how planning process should be conducted instead of the common usual process where landscape an item comes in the later stage. Because of the structure and design should integrate the technical needs of plantation. Okay, your last project showed that the rooftop garden in a solarium environment, and it seems that the trees that were brought is already matured. Okay, but how do you deal with trees that were brought in or planted small and with eventually grew after?
great question. Okay, in terms of the planning thing, when I was because in my line of work, although I do mainly landscape architecture, but the scope of, well, I hate to use this word scope, I just use it, my God. 7 years of being back home, unfortunately. Well, my responsibility these days grew to cover larger areas. And more I find we have to, you know, either contribute or intervention has been put, you know, into introducing, you know, green spaces. You know, when we are dealing with newer townships, for example, newer urban spaces, for example, we always try to advise them to plan it in a different sort of way. By different, I mean, you know, when you look at the trend of planning, this is by no means a criticism to, you know, our predecessors, but I just want to say it was a response to a different need, you know, because in the past, when you browse through brochures, for example, but when we were in school, Khairul, if you remember, every time people talks about something, they talks about convenience. You know, they talk about, you know, this place is 15 minutes away from that city. You can access this place, you can access that place, you know, and because of that, when convenience is in the mind of most people, we design our cities for that. So, you know, roads, infrastructures became the first thing we draw. It became the backbones that sets the outline of our cities because we were responding to that need. So people were, you know, saying, okay, so we need to have this infrastructure, this network of roads, and then, you know, this mall is going to be here, this place is going to be here. So we were planning with infrastructure as the first layer, and then, you know, having footprints as the second layer, and then leave whatever is the leftover spaces or, you know, the outcome of it for the outdoor public realm environment. So, you know, public realms, open spaces, you know, in the past almost always were a byproduct of that process. But nowadays, when you ask people what they want, they don't longer tell you that I want to get there in 15 minutes. Very seldom people say that. They would say, oh, I want a place that's safe, for example. I want a place that's clean, you know, it's a more comfortable environment, greeneries and that sort of thing. So there's a shift in what kind of need that they have in mind compared to what was in the past. So when, you know, we design these days, we start to not put first the roads. Instead, we put first the open spaces. Okay, this is going to be the central space, the central part. From it connects in blah, blah, blah to all of these other places. So then, you know, the public space in the reverse became, you know, the backbone of the design, of the layout. And then this is, I think, has become more and more a practice. I think a lot of developers are also going along this line, which I think is a healthy growth. And I think this needs to continue, where we put the quality first before we go into talking about the other things. So whatever that we have should come after we've actually plonked in, what spaces that could relate to qualities at the end of the process. So I'm not sure if this is what you were asking, but from what I understood, I would say that we should design our urban spaces from the viewpoint of putting, the public realm forward, having all of these quality spaces forward, and then create our spaces, our needs, and our conveniences along that line. With regards to the second question, if I'm not answering the first question correctly, I hope the person asking the question could inform me. For the second question, I always advise my clients, or the people that I work with, my co-consultants, when you plant in that level of a space, it's best that you do it when the trees are already matured. Yeah, because if you do it on the ground, it's fine, because you can bring the trees at about maybe 50 mm of diameter, and then they will grow over time. But when they are up there, they are in an environment that is quite confined. It is a challenge for them, not only in terms of the limited growth space that they have, but also, it's stronger wind, more open lights, and then they've got what do you call this? Gravity sort of a challenge. And so there are so many things that will impede the growth than any normal plants would experience. So they will still grow, but they won't be as fast as when you see them growing down on the ground. So I often would advise people to go for something that's a little bit more matured, maybe not as matured as what you saw in the project, because for that particular project, we were going to have a controlled environment. As I mentioned, it was going to be at 23 to 26 degrees at all time. And some of those plants were from a subtropical environment. There was some from tropical environment, which requires different changes of temperature for them to be able to thrive. And because we were made aware of the environment that they're going to be within, we chose plants that would survive in that sort of environment, but at the same time, would be contained. What I'm trying to say is that because we know if we bring certain trees into that environment, they won't grow further, or they will slow down in their growth process and speed, we have to bring them up from a certain size. It's much better to have your trees, if you plant them on a higher elevation, in a size that you're comfortable with, instead of you planting them small and then wait for them to grow big, because sometimes they may not come up to that point. They could, but maybe double the time frame, or even triple the time frame that you would normally get when you plant them down on the ground. Of course, there are other method that people have used. They used this inducer to force the plant to grow. I'm not so familiar with that sort of technology, but there are people who actually use those kind of things. But I would say, go for plants that are in the desirable range when you plant them at that age. I mean, at that level.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I think with that, perhaps that is the last question. We still have a few questions here. I don't know whether you still available to answer all. Well, I think if you can stay here for about another 10 minutes probably. Is it okay, guys?
No, I'm
okay,
at home.
Everybody?
I'm already at home. I'm not going anywhere.
because we have here a few interesting questions. I think I still want to go ask you for this question. This is from Alif. Hello, Mr. Daniel. As many vital industries nowadays progress toward technological advancement, how do you foresee landscaping industry in the future?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that? It sounds a
Okay,
little
as
big.
many vital industry nowadays progress towards technological and advancement, how do you foresee landscaping industry in the future?
Well, it's going to stay the way it is, plus what do you call this? Additions of maybe different methods. You know, you'll have probably better solution of things. It can be, you know, a two-directional sort of situation. It can be good, it can also be bad. Because, for example, if I can just share with you, technological advancement enables you to have things that are not supposed to be in one particular place in a particular place. You know, so for example, you could bring, say, a baobab tree from Africa or somewhere and bring it into our environment because you're able, through technology, to do that. And by doing so, you could probably accidentally create what we call as invasive species introduction into an environment. It could be as far as that, you know, it could be as extreme as that. You know, because in the likewise, when the other industries were exploring technology in order to enable certain things, you know, they open up doors that later on they couldn't close. So it could be as bad as that, but it could also be, you know, on the good side of things, you know, where you would be able to have technologies that can, as you saw in the images I showed you, you know, make it able for trees and plants to grow, you know, within the context of architecture. For example, in the Singapore hotel project, that's not my job, by the way, but it was done by a brilliant architect, a brilliant landscape architect who actually manipulated the way the building normally works, but then using a bit of technology to benefit that function of the building to enable the trees to grow. So they, for example, channeled water, you know, through a system into those planter boxes, and then they don't require to add more water because, you know, the building itself is supplying water to those planters, you know, as part of its day-to-day operation. So, you know, there are great things like that, great inventions like that, innovations like that, that enables things that were not possible in the past happening today. As landscape architects, it forces me to not only grow, but challenge some of my knowledge and understanding. Of course, before technology became some of the decision-making factors that we have to deal with, we always know that trees grow in the ground. You know, for example, like that, when I was a kid, I can never conceive the idea of trees can grow up on buildings, you know, leave alone I do it, you know, now that I'm at this age. But back then, this was something that was traditionally known to be like that. But through technology, it could happen. And I remember having to keep myself up in all of those changes and things happening. And after a while, I realized that you have to catch up. You have to allow it to happen. But as you allow it to happen, you must also, you know, not forget that, like us, trees are organisms, and they, no matter how they, I mean, if us as a human being, you know, we need to eat, we need to, you know, do our biological processes. If you go to the moon, you still would have to do all those things. It doesn't mean that you landed on the moon, suddenly you don't have to eat, you know, and that you can just, I don't know, fly and then breathe a different kind of air. No, you can't. So the same thing goes to plants, you know, just because they grow up now in a different environment, we think that, you know, they change biologically. They don't. So no matter how the technology advances, we have to still understand trees at its basic knowledge and its basic, you know, level, because biologically that's how they will still be, regardless of however method of application you go by to do that.
Okay. Okay, so I think this is the last question. This is from our lecturer. Okay,
This is
Dr.
like the fourth
Iskandar.
question. Okay, no problem.
Okay. So I promise you, this is the last one.
Yeah?
Okay,
Okay,
from
no.
Dr. Iskandar. The key forest garden built in 2018, a complex of 8 green forest building located in Chengdu, and it is consisted of more than 800 apartments. Surprisingly, not more than 10 families accommodate this vertical jungle, which become failure project as it attracts too many mosquitoes and other problems. Based on your experience, what is your opinion and recommendation to solve this problem?
Okay, first I need to go back to the history of that project. That project was driven by a good vision, but in the wrong context of community. It's the same thing as what some developers now are trying to do in our country, where they try to import not just about you know, the trees or the greeneries, but architectural layouts or function that may not work in our context of living. And you know, this is beginning. Before I get to the problem of the plans, I want to begin by first saying it's a planning problem, because you know, because I studied that project. First, we studied the project because it was one of the first to successfully do it in a large scale in China, where you know, people weren't so explorative in that sense, especially in a second tier and a third tier city like Chengdu. Well, Chengdu was a crossover between a second tier and a third tier city. Shanghai and Beijing is all first tier cities, so they're more exposed. But even then, it's very difficult because of the way that people live. Chengdu is a little bit, what do you call this? Different, and at the same time was shocking to us, because we would expect something like that to be done more in Shenzhen or Guangzhou or places like that. That's almost closer to the tropical environment. But when Chengdu was doing it, we were like a bit, wow, okay, so this is new. So we went on to try and study that, but we already had a doubt at that point that, you know, people would actually appreciate that because of how the society and the community would live in Chengdu itself. So not, you know, the genus loci of the place was not fully understood, and then things were being provided not in response to what at the end of the day, you know, people would actually want to go and do it. And this has become a problem, you know, not just particularly in Chengdu, but also happening to some extent here in our country, in Malaysia. So, you know, in terms of, you know, the beginning of the process, I think in terms of the planning situation, it wasn't really understood, and I don't think that particular project was done in the second diagram method that I showed you just now, where everything was correlated. I think it was a vision driven by, you know, a small group, and then they just want to carry it on with that. So then, you know, it became a project that was built, and then it was open, you know, for people to live in. And then, you know, as I mentioned, it's not a place where that kind of community would appreciate. And they try to live in it, and then, you know, they experience the problem, and then they realize that, nope, this is not what we wanted. We don't want to live like pandas, and then that sort of thing. And then they decided to go out of it. And yes, you know, it becomes a problem afterwards. But I wouldn't say that it's because of the landscape. You know, it's because that it was done in a vision that was not correctly placed, and then it was executed for a context that was not suitable for the community, and then the community coming into it don't want to live in it, and then therefore the environment left, you know, to its own demise and unattended to. It's a similar situation. I always try to give this analogy. You know, like if you want to rear fishes, you have tanks. You know, but you got to decide, you want to rear saltwater fish or you want to rear freshwater fish, because those are two different ecosystems altogether. And what you decide will determine the kind of things you bring in. And, you know, if you cannot set up a tank for saltwater fish, and then you put in, you know, freshwater fish in there, and definitely the freshwater won't live. So after a while, you know, it's going to become an abandoned tank, and everything's just going to be, you know, a failure. So it's a similar situation. That's what happened there in Chengdu. And to be frank with you, you know, that kind of situation, once it has happened to that extent, to that scale, it's difficult for it to be reversed. But there are currently proposals by some architects and also some designers to propose to the government to turn it into a sort of for other functions. You know, there are some hoteliers who are actually exploring to take it, and you know, for people to come and stay once in a while, then they could enjoy it. But if you were to live there and then have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, it can be quite a challenge. So it's a problem that has happened because of misunderstanding, misconception. Again, I was just having this conversation with Dr. Cairo, I think 2 weeks ago when we were talking about this. I went ballistic to say that, well, I was a bit angry because we had a situation where I was discussing with a fellow designer about you know, having greeneries in architecture. I was limiting what they were trying to do. They wanted to push it to the limit, but you know, from the logical perspective, I told them that's not something that you should do because people are in the wrong understanding. They thought that, you know, having greeneries and bringing them in would do good just like that. But without you understanding it and what it can do in the long run and so on and so forth and what you're doing it for, like the question that was asked earlier about if I were to choose greeneries for function or for aesthetic, I would say for function. So you got to do it for the right reasons. And if you do it just because you are responding to a trend or because you think that this is something that, you know, it's going to make you famous and this is the outcome, you know, you're going to have something that's going to be left there to fail. And unfortunately, it's going to reverberate and it's going to resonate into, you know, a bigger context, and people are just going to associate that kind of, you know, design as a failure on the bigger scale when it actually is not the case. So wow, that was a very big discussion, but I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. I think we have a very great time with you. I think everybody is, I think, get a lot of experience, sharing your experience. I think this is good enough for our student. Okay, so we are hoping that we can have you more in in other times. Okay, hopefully we can have more time. And I think we would like to ask everybody, can you switch on your camera? Then we can have a photo session. Everybody, can we have that? Semua orang buka photo session. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, please. So, Puan Farah will help us for the photos. Puan Farah? Tak dengar Puan Farah?
Okay.
Okay, so now the student, please switch on your camera. Okay, semua.
Should I switch on this small one that I have on the side?
Yeah, okay. You ada dua lagi.
Yeah, I'm going to switch off the other.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so that's good. Okay. So Puan Farah, boleh count kot ya? Okay, I think quite successful event. We have more than 100 participants at one time, Alhamdulillah. So we expect that we're going to have more of this. Maybe not with Mr. Daniel, with other person. So we hope this is a good start. So hopefully maybe next time kita pun boleh conduct online je, no problem. Yeah. So again, thank you very much for your support, Daniel. And also to all students and to all the lecturers that we have here. Thank you so much. So saya rasa we end our session dengan tasbih kifarah dan surah wal-as.